Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The 13th Chime. The house stood on the outskirts of town, an ancient relic shrouded in ivy and shadow. I had inherited it from my great-uncle Tobias, a man I'd never met but whose reputation as an eccentric recluse was well known. The lawyer had been adamant that I take possession immediately, as if the house itself was eager for my arrival. When I first stepped inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and forgotten memories. Dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight that pierced the gloom, and the creak of the floorboards seemed to echo the sighs of long-dead residents. The centerpiece of the living room was an imposing grandfather clock, its face frozen at 11:59, a relic of a bygone era. My fingers brushed against its polished wood, and a shiver ran down my spine. "Why don't you just sell it?" my friend Lisa had asked when I told her about the inheritance. "Old houses like that are more trouble than they're worth." But something about the house called to me, a whisper at the edge of my consciousness that refused to be ignored. I had always been drawn to the past, fascinated by the stories buried in old walls and forgotten artifacts. And so, despite Lisa's warnings, I moved in. The first few days were uneventful, filled with the mundane tasks of cleaning and organizing. I spent hours exploring every nook and cranny, uncovering hidden rooms and secret passageways. The house seemed to welcome me, its creaks and groans becoming a familiar, almost comforting presence. Yet, the clock in the living room remained silent, its hands stubbornly refusing to move. One night, as I sat reading by the fire, the silence was shattered by a sudden, sharp chime. My head snapped up, heart pounding as I stared at the grandfather clock. It was midnight, and the clock had come to life, its chime echoing through the house. I counted each strike, a cold dread settling over me as the chimes continued past 12. 13 times the clock struck, and with each chime, a whispering voice joined the chorus, unintelligible but undeniably present. I stood, my book forgotten as I approached the clock. The whispers grew louder, filling the room with a chilling murmur that seemed to seep into my bones. I could make out fragments of sentences, disjointed words that hinted at something sinister. "Help us, trapped, beware," they said, and my blood ran cold. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. There was no answer, only the continued whispering that seemed to emanate from the very walls. I backed away, fear gripping my heart as the whispers faded, leaving me in a silence that was somehow even more terrifying. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the mind, the result of an overactive imagination and too many ghost stories. But as the days passed, the chimes and whispers continued, each night growing louder and more insistent. I began to dread the approach of midnight, my nerves fraying under the relentless onslaught of the supernatural. One evening, as I stood before the clock, I noticed something I had missed before. An inscription, barely visible beneath layers of grime, etched into the wood. I scraped away the dirt, revealing a series of words that sent a chill down my spine. "Time is the key. 13 unlocks the door." Hey, subscribe for more scary stories. The cryptic inscription haunted my thoughts as I went about my daily routines. What door could the clock unlock? And why 13? The questions gnawed at me, filling my waking hours and creeping into my dreams. I knew I had to find answers, even if they led me down a path I feared to tread. One stormy night, as the wind howled outside and rain lashed against the windows, I decided to confront the mystery head-on. Armed with a flashlight and a sense of determination, I returned to the living room and stood before the clock. Midnight approached, the anticipation coiling in my stomach like a snake ready to strike. When the first chime rang out, I braced myself. As each subsequent chime echoed through the house, I counted them aloud, my voice trembling. 13 times the clock struck, and with each chime, the whispers grew louder, forming a chorus of desperate voices. I focused on the sound, trying to discern any clues in their murmurings. Then, on the 13th chime, I noticed something I had missed before. A faint outline of a door appeared on the wall beside the clock, as if the vibrations had loosened a hidden mechanism. I ran my hands over the wall, feeling for any irregularities. There it was, a small, almost imperceptible seam. My heart pounded as I pressed against it, and with a soft click, the hidden door swung open. Behind the door was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The air that wafted up from below was cold and musty, carrying the scent of earth and decay. I hesitated, fear gripping me, but curiosity and a strange sense of duty pushed me forward. I descended the stairs, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. The staircase ended in a small, dimly lit chamber. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with dusty tomes and strange artifacts. In the center of the room stood a large, ornate mirror, its surface tarnished with age. As I approached, the whispers grew louder, now emanating from the mirror itself. "Help us," the voices pleaded, clearer now but still fragmented. I stared into the mirror, my reflection distorted by the grime. Then, to my horror, the reflection began to change. Faces appeared, ghostly and pale, their eyes wide with terror. They pressed against the glass as if trapped within, their mouths moving in silent screams. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "What do you want from me?" "We are the lost," one of the faces replied, its voice echoing in my mind. "Trapped by the clock, prisoners of time. You must free us." "How?" I asked, my heart racing. "What do I need to do?" "Unlock the 13th hour," the face said. "Find the key and set us free." The mirror fell silent, the faces fading back into the darkness. I stood there, shaken and confused. What key? Where was I supposed to find it? I turned to the shelves, hoping to find some clue among the ancient books and artifacts. My fingers brushed against a particularly old book, its leather cover cracked and brittle. The title, barely legible, read The Chronicles of the 13th Hour. I opened the book, my eyes scanning the yellowed pages. It was filled with arcane symbols and cryptic passages, but one thing stood out, a drawing of the grandfather clock, with the words "Key to the 13th Hour" inscribed beneath it. I knew then that the answer lay within the clock itself. I returned to the living room, the book clutched tightly in my hands. As I examined the clock more closely, I noticed a small keyhole hidden among the intricate carvings. My pulse quickened. This was it. I needed to find the key and unlock whatever secrets the 13th hour held. I spent the next few days scouring the house for the key, searching every drawer, every hidden nook and cranny. The whispers continued to haunt me, growing more desperate with each passing night. "Find the key," they urged. "Free us." My sleep was plagued by nightmares, my mind consumed by the quest. One rainy afternoon, I found myself in the attic, a place I had avoided since moving in. The air was thick with dust, and cobwebs hung like tattered curtains from the rafters. I rummaged through old trunks and boxes, hoping for a sign, when I stumbled upon an ornate chest, unlike anything else in the attic. It was locked, but I remembered an old, rusted key I had found in Tobias's desk. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the chest's lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and I lifted the lid. Inside was a collection of curious objects, an old photograph, letters bound with twine, and a small, intricate key, unlike any I had seen before. My heart leapt. This had to be it. That night, as the clock approached midnight, I stood before the grandfather clock, the key clutched tightly in my hand. The room seemed to pulse with anticipation, the air heavy with the presence of unseen entities. As the clock began to chime, I counted each strike, my breath hitching with each one. On the 13th chime, I inserted the key into the hidden keyhole and turned it. The clock's face began to glow with an eerie light, and the hands started to move, spinning wildly. The whispers rose to a fever pitch, a cacophony of desperate pleas and chilling moans. The room around me seemed to warp and shift, and I felt a strange sensation, as if I were being pulled through time itself. Suddenly, the room went silent. The clock had stopped, and I found myself standing in an unfamiliar place. The house was the same, yet different, as if I had been transported to another time. The furnishings were old-fashioned, the air filled with the scent of fresh flowers and polished wood. "Welcome," a voice said behind me, and I turned to see a man dressed in old-fashioned clothes. His eyes were hollow, his face gaunt. "You have unlocked the 13th hour." "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. "My name is William," he replied. I, too, was trapped by the clock, bound by the curse of the 13th hour. "Curse?" I repeated, my heart pounding. "What curse?" "The clock was created by a sorcerer," William explained. "He sought to control time, to trap the souls of the unwary within its gears. We are the victims of his madness, condemned to relive our final moments over and over until someone breaks the curse." "How can I break it?" I asked, desperate to understand. "You must destroy the clock," William said. "Only then will we be free. But beware, the sorcerer's power is great. He will not let us go easily." As he spoke, the room began to shift again, the familiar whispers rising once more. I was thrust back into the present, the clock still glowing with an unearthly light. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed the fireplace poker, my hands shaking, and raised it above my head. With all my strength, I brought it down on the clock. The glass shattered, and the gears inside began to grind and scream. The whispers turned into agonized wails, filling the room with a deafening roar. But I didn't stop. I struck the clock again and again, until it was nothing more than a pile of broken wood and twisted metal. The wails ceased, replaced by a profound silence. The air felt lighter, the oppressive presence lifted. I sank to the floor, exhausted but relieved. I had done it. I had broken the curse. Or so I thought. As I caught my breath, a new sound reached my ears, a slow, deliberate ticking. I looked up to see the remains of the clock beginning to reassemble themselves, the gears and pieces moving as if guided by an invisible hand. My relief turned to horror as I realized that the sorcerer's curse was far from broken. The clock's pieces moved with a life of their own, reassembling faster than I could comprehend. The air grew cold, and a deep sense of dread settled over me. Desperation clawed at my mind as I watched the cursed device come back together, each tick reverberating through my bones. I knew then that brute force alone would not be enough to defeat the sorcerer's dark magic. Think, I muttered to myself, pacing the room. The whispers had returned, softer now, almost soothing, as if urging me toward a solution. I remembered the book I had found in the hidden chamber, the Chronicles of the 13th Hour. Perhaps the answer lay within its pages. I raced back to the basement, my flashlight casting erratic beams across the walls. The room felt different this time, the atmosphere charged with a strange energy. I grabbed the book and flipped through its pages, scanning for any hint of how to truly break the curse. My eyes landed on a passage that described a ritual, a way to sever the sorcerer's bond with the clock. The instructions were detailed and precise, a circle of salt, specific incantations, and the use of a personal item from the sorcerer himself. I felt a glimmer of hope. If I could find something that belonged to the sorcerer, I might be able to perform the ritual and end this nightmare once and for all. I searched the room, pulling open drawers and examining every artifact. At the bottom of an old wooden box, I found a ring, ancient and ornate, with a dark gemstone that seemed to pulse with an inner light. This had to be it. Clutching the ring, I hurried back upstairs, ready to prepare for the ritual. The house groaned as if sensing my intentions, but I moved with purpose, drawing a circle of salt in the living room and placing the ring in the center. I began chanting the incantations from the book, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. The clock's ticking grew louder, more frantic, as if it knew what I was trying to do. As I completed the final words, a powerful wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles and sending papers flying. The temperature plummeted, and I felt a presence, dark and malevolent, materialize behind me. I turned to see a figure cloaked in shadows, eyes glowing with a sinister light. "You dare challenge me?" the sorcerer hissed, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You cannot break my curse. I am eternal." Summoning all my courage, I stood my ground. "Your time is over. You will not trap another soul." The sorcerer lunged at me, but as he crossed the salt circle, he recoiled, his form flickering. The ring in the center glowed brighter, and I continued chanting, louder and more forceful. The sorcerer screamed, a sound of pure agony, as his essence was drawn into the ring. The clock's ticking slowed, then stopped altogether, and the room was plunged into an eerie silence. I watched in awe as the ring absorbed the sorcerer's power, the gemstone darkening until it was a solid black. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The whispers were gone, replaced by a profound silence that felt almost sacred. I collapsed onto the floor, exhausted but victorious. It was over. The curse was finally broken. I glanced at the grandfather clock, now just an empty shell, and felt a wave of relief. The house was quiet, peaceful, as if it had been cleansed of its dark past. Days passed, and I began to restore the house, removing the remnants of the sorcerer's influence. Life slowly returned to normal, the memories of the terrifying nights fading like a bad dream. But I kept the ring, a reminder of the ordeal I had survived, and the lives I had freed. One night, as I sat by the fire, I heard a soft chime. My heart skipped a beat as I looked up, but there was no clock, only the ring on the mantel, its gemstone glinting in the firelight. A faint whisper reached my ears, a final thank you from the souls I had set free. I smiled, finally at peace, knowing that the 13th chime would never haunt me again. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. The Phantom Correspondence. It was a dreary autumn evening when I received the first email. The sky was overcast, casting a melancholic pallor over the house, and the wind howled like a distant wolf mourning its lost pack. I had just finished a long day at the library, where I worked as a curator of rare books. The past 5 years had been a haze of routine and sorrow, ever since my husband, Daniel, vanished without a trace. The email arrived in my inbox with a soft chime. My heart stopped when I saw the sender, Daniel. The subject line read, "Today's Adventures." With trembling hands, I opened the message. The email was written in Daniel's familiar, precise style, describing his day in meticulous detail: breakfast at our favorite cafe, a stroll in the park, and a visit to the old bookstore we both loved. "Hello, love. This morning, I had the usual at Café Le Monde. The barista still remembers our orders, your cappuccino with a dash of cinnamon and my black coffee with a hint of sugar. It feels strange without you here. I miss our morning rituals." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Daniel had been missing for 5 years. There had been no word, no sign of him, despite the relentless search efforts. And now, out of the blue, an email. It felt like a cruel joke, but deep down, a part of me clung to the hope that it was real. I hit reply, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What could I possibly say? How could I convey the mix of fear, hope, and confusion swirling within me? Finally, I typed, "Daniel, is it really you? Where have you been?" and hit send. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the email over and over in my mind. Was it a hacker? A cruel prank by someone who knew too much? Or was it truly Daniel, reaching out from some unknown place? The house, usually a comforting sanctuary, felt oppressive and filled with shadows that seemed to whisper secrets I couldn't decipher. The next morning, another email awaited me. This time, Daniel described a visit to the old lighthouse by the coast. I walked up the winding stairs, each step echoing with memories of our visits. The view from the top is as breathtaking as ever. I wish you were here with me, holding my hand. I decided to investigate. I took a leave of absence from work and drove to the lighthouse. The place was deserted, just as it had been since it was decommissioned years ago. I wandered through the dusty rooms, the air thick with nostalgia and the scent of salt water. There were no signs of Daniel, but the feeling that he had been there recently was palpable. As I stood at the top of the lighthouse, looking out over the churning sea, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if Daniel's presence lingered in the air, a ghostly echo of the man I loved. The questions multiplied in my mind. If he was alive, where had he been all these years? And why was he reaching out now, through emails that seemed to chronicle an ordinary life? The days turned into a blur as the emails continued to arrive. Each one detailed a new aspect of Daniel's daily routine, mundane and yet deeply personal. His words were filled with longing, as if he were trapped in some parallel existence, desperate to reconnect. But there was something else, a subtle undercurrent of fear that seeped through his carefully chosen words. One night, as I read his latest email describing a walk through the old cemetery where we used to picnic, I felt a presence behind me. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. Just the flickering shadows cast by the dim lamp. A sense of dread settled over me. Something was terribly wrong, and I was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. Days turned into weeks, and the emails from Daniel continued to arrive with unnerving regularity. Each one seemed to pull me deeper into a labyrinth of memories and emotions. The emails were both a lifeline and a torment, rekindling the love I had thought lost forever, while simultaneously deepening the mystery of his disappearance. One afternoon, I received an email that made my blood run cold. "I saw you today, at the library," Daniel wrote. "You look so beautiful, lost in your thoughts. I wanted to reach out and touch you, but I couldn't. Not yet." The very idea that he could see me, could be watching me, sent shivers down my spine. I looked around the library, but everything appeared normal. My colleagues were engrossed in their tasks, and the patrons were quietly browsing the shelves. I decided to confide in my best friend, Clara. She had been a rock for me during Daniel's disappearance and the subsequent years of uncertainty. Over a cup of tea in my kitchen, I showed her the emails. Clara read them in silence, her face a mask of concentration. Finally, she looked up, her eyes filled with concern. "This is eerie, Laura," she said. "I don't know who could be doing this or how they know so much, but it's not natural. You need to be careful." Clara's words echoed in my mind as I continued to receive the emails. Each one seemed to draw me further into a reality where Daniel was both present and absent, alive yet unreachable. The emails described places we had been, things we had done, but always with a strange, otherworldly twist. It was as if Daniel were moving through a shadow version of our world. One evening, after a particularly unsettling email describing a dinner he had prepared for us, I noticed something odd. The house, which had felt empty and devoid of life since Daniel's disappearance, now seemed to hum with an unfamiliar energy. I heard faint footsteps in the hallway, the creak of a floorboard, and once, I was sure I saw a fleeting shadow pass by the living room door. The next morning, I found an old, dusty photo album on the kitchen table. I hadn't seen it in years. It was filled with pictures of Daniel and me, documenting our lives together. But there was one photo that stood out, a picture of us at the old cemetery. I didn't remember taking it. In the background, partially obscured by a tree, was a figure watching us. It was Daniel, but with a look of anguish on his face. Terrified yet resolute, I decided to dig deeper. I revisited places from the emails, searching for clues. Each location felt imbued with Daniel's presence, but there were no concrete signs, only an overwhelming sense of loss and longing. I spoke to the cafe owner, the park gardener, the bookstore clerk. No one had seen Daniel, but they all remembered us vividly. Then, one night, I received an email that changed everything. "I'm trapped, Laura. Help me. Find the mirror." The message was short, but it carried a weight that crushed my heart. What mirror? Where was it? I frantically searched the house, looking for anything that could be the key to this cryptic message. In the attic, amidst the forgotten relics of our past, I found an old, ornate mirror covered in dust. It had been a wedding gift from Daniel's grandmother, a beautiful antique that we had never hung up. As I wiped away the grime, I felt a strange, magnetic pull towards the reflective surface. Suddenly, the room grew cold, and the lights flickered. I felt a presence behind me and turned to see Daniel's reflection in the mirror, looking back at me with sorrowful eyes. He reached out, and I heard his voice, faint and echoing, "Laura, please, help me." My breath caught in my throat as I stared into the mirror, Daniel's reflection shimmering in the glass like a distant memory. His eyes, once filled with warmth and mischief, now held a desperate plea. The room around me felt suspended in time, the air thick with anticipation. I reached out, my fingers brushing the cold surface of the mirror, and felt a shock of static electricity that sent shivers down my spine. "Daniel, where are you? How can I help you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The reflection began to waver, and I heard his voice, faint but clear. "I'm trapped between worlds, Laura. The mirror is a gateway. You must find the key to free me." As the words faded, the mirror returned to its ordinary, reflective state, leaving me alone with 1,000 questions and a pounding heart. The next morning, Clara came over again. I told her everything, my voice a rush of frantic urgency. She listened intently, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "We need to find out more about this mirror," she said. "There must be something that can help us understand what's happening." We spent the day poring over old books and documents, searching for any mention of the mirror or its powers. Finally, in an old family journal belonging to Daniel's grandmother, we found a reference to the mirror. It was said to be an ancient artifact, capable of connecting the living world with the realm of spirits. The key, according to the journal, was a talisman that had been lost generations ago. That night, I received another email from Daniel. "The talisman is hidden in the old chapel near the cemetery. You must find it, but be careful. There are forces that don't want us to be reunited." His words filled me with both hope and dread. The chapel had been abandoned for years, a decaying relic of a bygone era, and the thought of venturing there alone was terrifying. Clara insisted on coming with me. Armed with flashlights and a sense of determination, we made our way to the chapel under the cover of darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decay, and the trees whispered secrets as we passed. The chapel loomed ahead, its silhouette a stark contrast against the moonlit sky. Inside, the chapel was a ruin of crumbling stone and rotting wood. We searched through the debris, our flashlights casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. In a corner, beneath a pile of rubble, I found a small, ornate box. My heart raced as I opened it to reveal an intricately carved talisman, its surface glinting in the dim light. As I held the talisman, I felt a strange warmth emanate from it, a pulsating energy that seemed to resonate with the mirror's power. Clara and I hurried back to the house, our footsteps echoing in the silent night. Back in the attic, I approached the mirror with the talisman in hand. I held the talisman up to the mirror, and the air around me seemed to vibrate with a low hum. The reflection of Daniel appeared once more, his eyes wide with hope. "You found it," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "Now, place the talisman against the mirror and say my name." With a trembling hand, I pressed the talisman to the glass and whispered, "Daniel." The mirror began to glow with an ethereal light, and the reflection shimmered as if it were made of liquid silver. Daniel reached out, and I felt his hand, warm and real, clasp mine. Just as I thought he might step through, a dark shadow loomed behind him, and his expression turned to one of terror. "No," he cried out. "They're here. Don't let go." Before I could react, the shadowy figure pulled him back, and the mirror's light faded. The talisman slipped from my hand, and I collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Clara rushed to my side, but there was nothing she could say to ease the agony of losing Daniel again. The days that followed were a blur of grief and determination. Clara stayed with me, refusing to leave me alone with my sorrow. The emails from Daniel stopped, and the house felt emptier than ever, as if the echoes of our past had been silenced by the shadow that had taken him. One morning, as I sat staring at the mirror, the talisman clutched in my hand, Clara suggested we visit a medium she knew. At first, I was skeptical, but with no other leads, I reluctantly agreed. The medium, an elderly woman named Marguerite, welcomed us into her quaint, candlelit home. Her eyes were deep wells of wisdom and mystery. Marguerite listened as I recounted my story, her expression grave. When I finished, she took my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "The mirror is a powerful artifact, but it is also a dangerous one," she said. "The shadow you saw is a guardian of the realm between worlds. It doesn't want the living to interfere." I showed her the talisman, and she examined it closely. This talisman is part of the key, but not the whole. To truly free Daniel, you must confront the guardian and reclaim his soul. There is a ritual, but it requires great courage and a willingness to face the unknown. That night, Marguerite guided Clara and me through the ritual. We gathered around the mirror, the talisman placed at its base, and lit candles in a circle. Marguerite chanted in a language I didn't understand, her voice rising and falling like the tide. As she spoke, the mirror began to glow once more, and I felt the familiar pull of its power. Suddenly, the room grew icy cold, and a shadow appeared, looming large and menacing. Its form was a swirling mass of darkness, with eyes that glowed like embers. I could feel its hatred, a palpable force that sought to drive us away. But I couldn't back down, not now. I stepped forward, the talisman clutched tightly in my hand. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice steady despite the terror gripping my heart. "I want Daniel back. He doesn't belong in your world." The shadow hissed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. It reached out, tendrils of darkness snaking towards me. I closed my eyes and focused on Daniel, on our love and the life we had shared. The talisman grew warm in my hand, and I felt a surge of energy flow through me. "Daniel," I called out. "I'm here. Come back to me." The mirror's light intensified, and for a moment, the shadow wavered. I saw Daniel's reflection, his face filled with hope and determination. He reached out, and this time, our hands connected with a jolt of electricity. The shadow roared in anger, but I held firm, refusing to let go. With a final, desperate effort, I pulled Daniel through the mirror. The shadow shrieked and disintegrated into nothingness, the room flooding with light. Daniel collapsed into my arms, solid and real, his body trembling with exhaustion. I held him tightly, tears streaming down my face. Marguerite's voice cut through the haze. "It is done. You have reclaimed his soul." She placed a hand on my shoulder, her touch grounding me in the reality of the moment. Clara watched, her face a mask of relief and wonder. In the days that followed, Daniel slowly regained his strength. He told me of the shadowy realm, a place of eternal twilight where he had wandered, searching for a way back. The emails had been his desperate attempts to reach out, hoping I would find the key to his return. Life didn't return to normal overnight, but with Daniel by my side, I felt whole again. The mirror and talisman were carefully hidden away, their power dormant but ever present. We knew the shadow's realm was still out there, a dark mirror to our world, but as long as we were together, we could face whatever came our way. As we sat together one evening, the glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the room, Daniel squeezed my hand. "Thank you, Laura," he said softly. "You saved me." And as I looked into his eyes, I knew that our love had conquered even the darkest of shadows. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.